Welcome to another episode of the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. My name is Lee Davey. I'm not an alcoholic. I refuse to be anonymous. I'm someone who doesn't drink alcohol. I spend every waking moment of my life helping other people do the same, like right now. Today, episode 162, My Doesn't Time Fly? We're going to be talking about a book called Beyond Beliefs by the magnificent Melanie Joy. Okay, I'm trying to do a book review a week. The first one we did was Easy Way to Control Alcohol by Alan Carr. Last week we did Alcohol Explained by William Porter. We had a bit of a William Porter week last week, actually, including speaking to the man himself. And this week we're going to cover Beyond Beliefs by Melanie Joy. But before we get to Melanie Joy's fantastic treatise on communication, I just want to welcome to the Strive movement Phil, Erica, Elizabeth and Alison. It's really good to see you on board and checking in, introducing yourself, asking lots of questions, getting to know the members of your new family, and welcome. Yeah, it's always good to see new people here. I also want to say a big welcome to Bonnie and Susan, who managed to squeeze into the November taster at the last minute. Both Bonnie and Susan are going to try to become someone who doesn't drink alcohol for the entire month of November, and we're going to help them do that. And let's hope at the end of it they feel fan-dabby-dozy and they'd want to continue to do that for the rest of their life. That's the plan anyway. And finally, before I just jump straight into the meat of this one, no pun intended if you know Melanie, is don't forget that Striver Craig, who is currently doing the intensive, is giving away two free tickets to the December TTA taster. Okay, so he's giving away two £49 tickets. If you want to grab a hold of them, then send me an email at thetruthaboutalcohol@gmail.com, just explaining why you think Craig should pick you. Why should Craig pick you to take his money and join the December taster? What is it about you? What are you going to bring to the party? What are you going to change in your life? Why is becoming someone who doesn't drink alcohol so important to you? Okay, let us know. And if we get a lot of people after those places, we will put it to the vote. We'll include all the strivers and the moderators, and we'll put it to a vote. All right. Anyway, straight into this. So I have been, as you know, someone who doesn't drink alcohol since 2009. All right. And immediately after becoming that person and discovering who I was, right? Discovering the person who had hid himself from the world during his teenage years in order for him to fit in and follow the rules that society were laying out so I could be the perfect little human. When I found that guy, I immediately wanted to help the rest of the world, right? I had an intense drive to help other people understand the truth about alcohol, okay? But as so often happens in my life, I dived right into this thing without truly understanding and really cementing the knowledge that I had picked up through Alan Carr's Easy Way to Control Alcohol and everything else I was reading at the time. I really wasn't a master of that information. So, and the biggest problem that I suffered from back then was a lack of communication skills. It's on my bucket list to be a world-class communicator. I am a million miles away from that. But I'm also a million miles away from the type of communicator I was in 2009. I've grown and advanced a great deal. And had I known what I know today on how to communicate, I probably would have done that a little bit differently, and maybe I would have had a better start. But a real big problem sitting alongside a lack of communication skills when you are interacting with a world who drinks alcohol and you don't is an ability to translate the knowledge that you have inside your mind, i.e., I know how to stop drinking alcohol, and not just alcohol, I know how to stop a lot of the real seriously bad negative habits that you are suffering from or addicted to today. I know how to stop them, right? I know because I've done it, yeah? I'm thinking things like cigarettes, alcohol, sugar, gambling, things like that. So I know how to do it, but putting that into a coachable method is really difficult. And it's a big difference, like, sitting in the pub opposite my mate who drinks a lot of alcohol. And I'm trying to explain to him, what the truth about alcohol is. And alcohol is an invisible, violent, dominant belief system. And that we've been conned by the world to believe that alcohol has value, etc., etc. Just uttering those words to someone doesn't cut the mustard. It's not going to sink in because of the deaf effect, because of the cognitive dissonance. So you have to learn the skills, and you have to learn a coachable and teachable way of getting that message through to people. And if you have been a long-time listener to the Alcohol Addiction podcast, if you've been here from the beginning, you would have heard my philosophy change and morph into what it is today over a period of many years. I didn't just stop drinking alcohol and go, wow, yeah, alcohol is the benefits of alcohol are illusory. The truth about alcohol is that alcoholism is an invisible, violent, dominant belief system. Blah, 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 blah. I didn't go into that straight away, did I? I just knew that alcohol had provided me with no value in my life, but I didn't have a philosophy underpinning that, okay? And one of the core mentors who helped me see the light and to help me understand and unravel what my philosophy was and to put it down into a teachable method was Melanie Joy. I first found out about Melanie Joy through Daniel Negreanu. Daniel Negreanu is a professional poker player from Canada, and Daniel Negreanu is a vegan. And Melanie Joy wrote a book called Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows, which is a book ostensibly about veganism and how and why people eat meat. Okay, now I was already vegan when I picked up the book and read it, and I won't say that Melanie's book Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows cemented my decision to be a vegan, because I was quite steadfast in that decision anyway after watching the documentary Earthling. So there was nothing about the book that said, yeah, I am now a more stronger-willed vegan than I was before, because that was never the main intention of reading the book. But I would still put this book up there as one of the top 3 most influential books in my life, or top 5, I would say, because what I uncovered in there was my philosophy. And I'm not going to go into this in great detail because this isn't a show about veganism, but essentially what Melanie Joyce, the question that Melanie set out to answer in that book was, why do we eat meat? And of course, at the same time that Melanie's figuring out why we eat meat, I'm trying to figure out why we drink alcohol. And Melanie stumbled across what a belief system around meat that she calls carnism. And to simplify things, Melanie is basically saying that for the vast majority of people who live in this world, we don't really make a conscious decision to eat meat. You know, we are not the gatekeepers of the kitchen when we're children. We are fed whatever is put in front of us. And the narratives that eventually become our convictions and our beliefs and our convictions and our worldview around what we eat really comes from our parents and our culture and the society that we are brought up in. And for most large Western cultures in the world, the ones that, you know, Melanie's books are directed towards, I'm thinking places like UK, Europe, Australasia, North America, then eating meat is just something we do because that's what we've always done, okay? And this belief system that drives us to eat meat without actually thinking about why we're eating meat or the consequences, if there are any, of eating meat. And, you know, as a vegan, I believe that there are a lot of consequences to eating meat. That belief system, Melanie termed an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system. So I was like, holy shit, alcohol is also an invisible, violent, and dominant belief system. It's violent because it kills 3.3 million people a year and is one of the causal factors in over 200 diseases. I know that it's violent because I nearly died. I've been into so many fights. I've seen so much carnage on a Saturday night. I know that it's dominant belief system because everyone around me drinks alcohol, and I'd read in the World Health Organization report in 2014 that over 52% of people questioned had tried alcohol in their life. So I knew it's a dominant belief system. And hey, it has to be an invisible belief system when you understand that there's so many people drinking it, even though it causes so much anarchy in the world. And when you start to talk to people about alcohol, and you realize that alcohol has become this elephant in the room, if you like, and nobody wants to talk about it, it becomes quite clear when you've read a book like Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows, and you start to think about invisible belief systems that cultivate and curate our lives, you start to see that actually why we drink alcohol is also an invisible, violent, dominant belief system that is entrenched in our very fabric, in our very DNA, to the degree that I argue in the Truth About Alcohol Intensive that we never made a choice to drink alcohol. We were always created from birth and designed to drink alcohol. My daughter is 2 years old. She slowly will be designed and influenced to drink alcohol. And I have to try very hard. I will have to try very hard to not censor that, but to provide her with enough details and information and evidence that there is a different way of living and being cool and all that kind of stuff in the world, right? Super, super important. But at the time I find this, I'm still thinking to myself, well, Melanie's got a word for it. Like, her word is carnism. I don't have a word. And I remember walking around for ages thinking, I need a word here. I need something to define this invisible belief system. And then that's when I realized that the word was alcoholism. And when you do the intensive, we talk about isms, and we talk about what is alcoholism and the invisible, violent, dominant belief system. So that's where it came from. It all came from Melanie. And a large part of our philosophy is from Melanie. It's directly from Melanie's work in Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows. And a lot of the work that we do in the intensive comes from Melanie's work. So I am always, always indebted for Melanie's influence in helping me help create 1 million people that do not drink alcohol. Because of that book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows, Melanie is affecting not just the world in terms of vegans versus non-vegans and all the good she could do by getting people to eat less meat, but she's also influencing people who are now drinking less alcohol. And that is because Melanie wrote this fantastic book, and I found it and I stumbled across her philosophy and pinched it, if you like, and injected it and gave it an alcohol flavor instead of the flavor of chicken. All right. So that's how I met Melanie Joy, and Melanie's been a guest on the podcast. I'm a real fanboy of Melanie. So like when she said she'd be on the podcast, I was like over the world pleased and happy with that. So check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes. So that was her second book, Why We Love Dogs. The third book that she wrote, I believe, is even better than Why We Love Dogs. I mean, say even better. It's a completely different book. But before I picked up Beyond Beliefs, if anyone would have said to me, what book shall I read to improve my communication skills? I would have said read People Skills by Robert Bolton. But now I would say read Beyond Beliefs by Melanie Joy. And I'll tell you why. One of the biggest hurdles that people have when they decide to become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, and one of the biggest reasons that they start drinking again, is because when they make the decision to become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, their partner, the person that they live with, their wife, their spouse, whatever, they do not follow suit. They do not stop drinking alcohol, okay? And that creates a real unease, a real disconnection, and a lot of conflict within the relationship, all right? Now, you might be listening to this thinking, well, I don't have a relationship. I'm not in that relationship. Well, please keep listening, because these relationships that we need to navigate ourselves through and learn to coexist and connect again after we stop drinking alcohol are not just, they're not just defined to our spouse or our boyfriend or our girlfriend. It's our best friends. It's our people we share workspace with. It's our parents. It's our daughters. It's our sons. It's our grandparents. It's our aunties. Our uncles. Right? It's everybody. It's all our relationships. So don't think that you don't need to listen to this if you're not in a relationship. We're all in relationships. All right. And what the book sets out to explain to you in an absolute fantastic depth, and I am going to at some point contact Melanie about turning this book into a training course. I think it is that important, right? Is she explores the differences in relationships and communication skills and connection personalities between vegans and non-vegans. All right. And you might think to yourself, well, I'm not a vegan, right? Why am I interested in this book? Because if you go through her book and you kind of like cross out the word vegan and non-vegan and replace it with person who doesn't drink alcohol and person who does drink alcohol, you get exactly the same premise here. Essentially, Melanie Joy has written the book that needs to be written to answer all the questions you have when you're saying, I've stopped drinking alcohol, nobody else around me in a relationship has, and I think my relationships are going to self-destruct and I'm going to be lonely. I'm going to be in a divorce. I'm going to have no friends. I'm not going to be able to connect with people. And how do I navigate myself around that? How do I stop that from happening? This is the book that will help you with that. Okay? And one of the number one issues we have on Strive when we go through the intensive is people having an issue with their spouse. You know, my spouse is ashamed of me because I don't drink and she doesn't know how to explain to her friends why I don't drink anymore. My spouse ridicules me. My spouse laughs at me. My spouse drinks in front of me when he knows that I don't like it. My spouse gets really, really drunk and tries to initiate sex with me all the time when I really, really don't want it. All those type of things. This book will help you with that. Now, unfortunately, this book is one of those where it would be easier for me to talk about the unhighlighted parts of it than the highlighted parts of it. Last week when I did Alcohol Explained, I went through the highlighted parts of that book and that took an hour. It would take me several days to go. I would basically be reading the entire book out. It's that good. So I just want to focus on a couple of core issues that Melanie touches on. One of the things that I loved about the book was her chapter on becoming allies. And here's Melanie in her own words. She says, many of us, though, fear differences in our relationships, largely because of the romantic myth that differences drive people apart. That's one reason why in the early stages of romantic relationships, people tend to selectively notice and exaggerate all they have in common. We have learned to overvalue being similar and we devalue being different. And we worry that our differences will cause conflict and will ultimately disconnect us. That is a super important point for me, I felt. In as much as when we stop drinking alcohol and our partner doesn't stop drinking alcohol or people in relationships don't, we immediately believe that that difference is going to ultimately drive a wedge between us. You know, we believe that there is that being different to the person that we're in a relationship with is not a good thing. All right. And because we're worrying about it so much, and the reason we're worrying, let's be honest here, is we're actually treading into unknown territory. So most of us cannot remember ever being someone who doesn't drink alcohol. So now we are that person. We're really we've got a bit of intrepidation around us. We've got a bit of fear. We really don't know how the world is going to react to the fact that we don't drink anymore. So because of that, the resistance is really strong at this point, okay? And the resistance will start to tell you that you have real problems and issues with your relationship. And the reason the resistance is telling you that and driving your subconscious thoughts and your negative thoughts around your relationships is because ultimately it wants you to start drinking again. And what better way to convince you to start drinking again by driving the subconscious belief that you will be alone in the world, because detailed in our very DNA is a need to exist within a tribe. Like it's biologically programmed within us to exist within a tribe. So if our resistance is trying to take away that from us and try to ostracize us from our tribe and try to make us feel lonely, there will be a massive psychological and biological drive for that not to happen. And unless we get help and support by the likes of Melanie, Strive, The Truth About Alcohol, the quickest way to rectify that fear of being alone is to drink again, because now we're not alone, right? Because now our friends will go, yeah, he's back. He's back, baby. For a minute, I thought I lost you there. I thought you was going to go with all those weirdos that don't drink alcohol. And suddenly, all of a sudden, you feel like you're back part of a tribe again. But then somewhere down the line, your cognitive dissonance will kick back in again, and you'll start to realize, holy shit, even though I got my friends back, I'm still not complete. There's still something missing in my life. And that's because once you've understood and seen the truth about alcohol, you can't remove it from your brain. It doesn't go anywhere. You can start drinking again, but it's not going to be the same because you're gonna understand and know about alcohol a lot more than you did before. So with the resistance really kicking in here, when you are at loggerheads with your partner, the thought of becoming an ally with them or a team is one of the last things that's emerging out of your subconscious. And I think this is particularly true if you are not skilled in the art of communication. And how many of us are? Like, let's be honest here, we're not trained how to communicate in school to the degree that we're talking about here. Most of us will be in our 40s, 50s, 60s. If that is true, then I think it's highly unlikely that our parents taught us how to communicate properly and effectively. Because the way I see it and the way that I've learned on the internet is actually learning and understanding the importance of communication in terms of driving a connection or dealing with conflict seems to be a fairly new phenomenon in terms of getting help and training for that. I think the internet is a big help in that, right? So a lot of us are really not prepared for this, right? We're just not prepared for it. We don't really know how to communicate with people. And so what happens? Well, I tell you what doesn't happen. We don't think about how we're going to communicate with people at a conscious level. What happens is you walk into a room, you're at a party, you've just stopped drinking alcohol, you're with your wife who's got a glass of wine in her hand, and someone turns around and says to your wife, and you overhear this, you're not even part of the conversation, why doesn't your husband drink alcohol anymore? You've explained to her that it's because it's an invisible, violent, dominant belief system, you don't want to be a part of it anymore, and it's driving you nuts. And she turns around and says something like, oh, he's just going through a phase. It won't last long. He'll be drinking soon. I'll make sure of that, right? When that happens and you overhear that, you do not then think to yourself, whoo, I'm not happy with that. How can I approach her later when I'm feeling less angry in a way that I can connect with her and find a way that we can become allies through this and emerge in a way that doesn't happen again and she has more respect for my decision? That's not going to happen. What is going to happen is you're going to say, that fucking bitch, you wait till I get her home. I can't fucking believe she said that. I'm going to give her what for after. Or you might not say that. You might just be quietly steaming. You decide not to say anything because you're not that type of person. You go home and she leaves the fridge door open. She doesn't cook the chicken properly. She drops a knife on your foot by accident. Whatever it is, and this simmering tension that you've got explodes and you start having an argument or conflict, and you never ever address the fact that the real reason that you're arguing is because she upset you in a party, right? There's lots of different ways around this, right? But my point is, you're not going to be consciously saying to yourself, I need to deal with this in a very professional, grown-up, heartfelt, connective way. All right? You're not going to be doing that. But if you read a book like Beyond Beliefs, if you're a striver, if you're taking the Truth About Alcohol intensive, then you will be aware of, or more consciously aware of, the importance of communication. Now, you might not get it right straight off the bat. In that instance, you might still rage and go to war. But I guarantee you, one thing you will do is after you have gone to war and you simmer down a little bit, because you've read this book and because you're a striver and because you take the Truth About Alcohol intensive and because you're talking about it with strivers about how you fucked up, you will immediately start to feel remorse and shame, and you will then learn from the mistakes that you made And you will be able to go back to your wife and you will be able to apologize about your role in that conflict and start having communication that will help mend it and provide a better solution moving forward, without a shadow of a doubt, okay? Because if it takes a long time to become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, because we need to rewire all these neurological connections that believe that alcohol is normal and pleasurable, imagine how long it takes for you to rewire those different neurological connections that automatically kick in when you're in a conflict situation like that have been hardwired from watching your parents do the same thing. And this is super important if you've got children. You know, just think about the stuff that comes out of your mouth, the phrases you use, the way your mouth and your facial expressions change, the tone, the slang that you use, just the way that you express yourself. Very often you'll find, oh, that's my mum, or oh, that's my dad. Even if you've told yourself growing up that I never want to be like my mum or my dad, right? And what being a striver is all about, what being someone who doesn't drink alcohol is all about, is to start analyzing and questioning the way that we're behaving in life and why we behave the way we do. The truth about alcohol and strive is not about stopping drinking alcohol. If you want to stop drinking alcohol, you can go to AA. Like, we're much greater than that. We're about understanding who we are. And we can't understand who we are without first understanding why we do the things we do and coming to peace with that and having some compassion with that and some forgiveness and understanding, and then vowing to make incremental changes, improvements as you go on. And I've always said it, you know, the opposite to addiction for me is communication. Like, if we can become a really effective communicator, then we can talk our way out or listen our way out of our addiction, definitely. So becoming allies is a really super important part of this book. And Melanie gives you lots of different advice on how you can do that. And Liza regularly says to me, Lee, one of your failings is I don't feel like we're a team. You're always against me. You're always have a different opinion. You're always wanting to play devil's advocate. And when you analyze why that is, it's a lack of empathy. It's an inability to listen to somebody share something that's bothering them without the male-dominated, testosterone-driven, DNA-filled drive to fix that situation or defend your right to be right. And I think the male of the species can learn a lot of the female of the species here by learning to be greater users of empathy and to always think of the longer term view of, what do I want out of my relationship? I want us to be deeply connected. I want us to be a team. I want us to be allies. I want our children to see that we're really strong. And if you can focus on that long-term goal, then hopefully you can use that long-term goal to get over your need and your desire for instant gratification defense, instant gratification ego, instant gratification need to be right. So becoming allies and always having that, like if someone screams and shouts at you, first of all, it's like, how can we be allies right now? How can we be allies right now? And one of the first things that helps me is to become an ally is, how can I find a grain of truth in what this person just said? So we can start this conflict situation from a base of understanding. All right. Another thing that Melanie Joy talks about in this book, which I think is really important, is she talks about working in concentric circles and how the center of this circle is our core beliefs, our core values, our personality, and how people have very different personalities, very different core beliefs. And then at the periphery of the circle, the outer circle, are these periphery beliefs that you have, like different football teams that you support, or different things that you like to buy when you go shopping, or different TV shows you like to watch. And invariably, those outside peripheral differences, they're not main core triggers, are they, when it comes to us feeling severely lonely and isolated? It's generally the core issues, right? And around personality. And Melanie mentions it in her book, and another book that I might do a book review on the future, or you could certainly check it out on Amazon, is The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, And understanding that just because you have different core values in the core of your being, or you have a completely different personality than the person you're in love with, it doesn't mean that you can't coexist with them anymore. That you... so a good example is when you become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, you're now going to change the hierarchy of your value system, your core value system. Like, not drinking alcohol is going to be a core value for you, a core kind of like a conviction, like something that's like it's stronger than a belief. It's like you're not moving away from this. Like if you become someone who doesn't drink alcohol, you take that vow, then when people drink around you, it's going to be very difficult for you. It's going to be very difficult for you. I mean, watching your loved ones drink alcohol and really hurting themselves when you can see that there's no value in it, you understand that can be really difficult for you to just stand by and let that happen, especially if it's someone you really love, right? So she talks about those differences, but giving you a way or an understanding of seeing that there's a way of navigating yourself around that with a much more effective communication style, okay? But understanding that generally when we're in dispute or we're not getting on, there's something really fundamental going on that's related around personality, values, beliefs, worldviews, that kind of thing. And it's often driven by a desire to be seen and heard and understood, which is driving this kind of conflict. So when you stop drinking alcohol, you are desperate to be seen. You're desperate to be heard. You're desperate to be understood. You want people to understand why you're making the choices you are, and how you want that decision to be respected. You want to know that your partner is on your side. And going back to the allies thing, your partner can drink alcohol and still learn to be your ally in a social situation. So a good example, going back to the one where I said about the wife in the party, obviously ashamed of her husband and making up some cock and bull story because she doesn't know how to navigate around that, and you heard it and you get really angry. If you want to be an ally, one way of helping in that situation, when the guy turns around and says, why isn't your husband drinking, is he turns around and says, well, actually the reasons why he's not drinking are really kind of like complicated and deep, and maybe you want to talk to him about that, not me. But I'll say this for you, I think he's making a tremendous decision, and I think he's gonna really benefit for it, and he's got my 100% backing. It's very often when we're out in social situations and we're the person who doesn't drink, part of the cognitive dissonance and part of alcoholism as an invisible, violent, dominant belief system is that people who drink will start to ridicule us, and they'll ridicule us by making us the butt of their jokes. And there's nothing worse than your partner or someone you're friendly with in that event actually backing the side of the joker. What we want to see happen if we're developing good relationships and we have allies, even if they're drinking, is them to say, whoa. I don't think we should take the piss out of this guy, just because he's not drinking and we are. I think we should respect his decision. That helps a lot when you've got an ally like that. So I think that is really, really super important. And going back to when we're talking about these core values and the true causes of relationship problems, what Melanie says is the true cause of relationship problems is rarely our differences, right? So I was saying that very often our problems are because we have core value clashes and that kind of thing. Melanie's saying, no, it's not as simple as that. It's how you relate to those differences. Going back to the wife-husband thing, the first scenario, isn't it? She didn't relate very well to those differences. In the second scenario I gave you, she relates really well to those differences. So that's really super important. And Melanie talks about 3 myths when it comes to difference. So myth number 1 is difference means deficiency. So she says we view differences as deficiencies. We see the other as deficient in a particular area, and generally an area which we feel we are sufficient. So we may feel when we stop drinking alcohol that the other person, that we are now sufficient in terms of health and well-being, and we might think we're more intellectually superior, you know. And because the person we're with doesn't drink, is still drinking alcohol, we may feel that there is a real deficiency there. And if we're not careful, that deficiency will be borne out in judgments, likely offhanded, sarcastic, judgments using underhand tactics. And half the time we don't even know we're doing it. But again, reading these books and joining the intensive really helps for us to understand and go, oh, sorry, I really judged you right there, right? So difference means deficiency. Difference means disconnection. So Melanie says, how we define a problem determines how we define a solution. If we define the problem incorrectly, then our solution won't solve the problem. It may even make the problem worse. For example, if we believe that the other's differences are the cause of conflict in our relationship, then we also believe that the way to solve our conflict is by eliminating the differences, and that's usually by changing the other person to be more like we are. Okay, so that is a really important point, because she's using the word myth here because she sees in her work that these are narratives that we are almost programmed to produce and to behave in a certain way as deemed appropriate by society. So we will believe that when we stop drinking alcohol and our person is still drinking, we will believe that the source of the conflict is them. They are the cause of our disconnection. Their difference is the cause of our disconnection. And then if we believe that, then the only way to solve that and make our life easier is by changing them to be more like us. Because I said that, and you can see now hopefully with this one, why so many people start drinking again. It's because they start out by getting the other person to stop drinking, to make them feel better, to eliminate that difference between them, because they feel they can't live with the difference. And when it doesn't happen, they join them. They start drinking because they think it's the only way to eliminate the difference between them. And what Melanie Joy's book helps you to understand is that differences between partners is super important. There is a real downside for you being very, very similar and not having any differences and being totally compatible. There is an issue there, right? And she talks about that in our book. It's better to embrace our differences and navigate a way that we can live to respect them and to, exist within them. So a good example is, rather than trying to change someone to be someone who doesn't drink alcohol, is just understand that you were once in that situation, that person likely believes that there's a lot of value in drinking alcohol, and it's serving a purpose for them. And you know how difficult it is and how afraid you've been to try to make the switch. Why would it be any different for this person? And when you started to be someone who doesn't drink alcohol, you desperately needed people to have empathy, understanding and love and support, not to tell you that your decision to not drink alcohol is fucking stupid, right? So if we can start thinking about our own issues, and in the intensive we call this module alcoholism amnesia, where we very quickly forget that, hey, I was in that position as well. Then we can see that, hang on a minute now, I don't need to drive this person to be like me. I think it was Don Miguel Ruiz that says, if you want a dog, don't go and buy a cat. My first divorce happened because I desperately tried to turn my first wife into everything that I desired in a woman, and part of that was someone who doesn't drink alcohol. Okay, I was very, very disrespectful and very, very hurtful for her. The most respectful thing that I should have done is ended the relationship, which I didn't have the balls to do, and then go out in the world and find somebody who doesn't drink alcohol. That was more respect, because then that allows her to do the same, to find somebody who respects her for drinking alcohol and is okay with having that in their life, so she can fall in love and live happily ever after, etc., etc., right? Myth 3, similarity equals compatibility. Melanie says, similarity, however, does not necessarily translate to compatibility. In fact, sometimes similarities can actually get in the way of compatibility. When we are too similar, we may compete with each other to get our similar needs met. For example, the extroverts may both want to be the center of attention, have trouble listening to each other. Being too similar can also limit our opportunities for growth, and we may become stagnant and unbalanced. For example, two activists who both have the tendency to over-focus on the cause and under-focus on their own needs can become increasingly frustrated and burned out in both their work and their relationship. So can you imagine Liza being like me? If she was like me, we would both be like 100% throwing ourselves at striving the truth about alcohol, and we would not be working on our relationship. Whereas Liza is more likely to say, Lee, you need to slow down, you need to pay attention to what's going on here because I'm not happy and I want to work on our relationship. Liza is much more likely to say that than I am, you know. And I made a mistake earlier on. I said that it's important for that we don't have to be compatible. We do have to be compatible. I made a mistake there. It is important that we're compatible, but our difference, we can have differences and we don't have to be similar, you know. On uncompatibility, what Melanie says is, such stress around food and eating also occurs because when non-vegans don't understand veganism, they can interpret the vegan's choice not to consume certain foods as a rejection, not simply of eating animals, but of their connection in that relationship. Feeding and sharing food with others is a connecting experience for many people. So a vegan's refusal to eat foods that, for example, they once enjoyed and shared with their family can be seen as rejecting the family connection. Now remember what I said. Let's look at this not as a vegan, non-vegan situation, but let's look at this as an alcohol, non-alcohol situation. And I'll read this again. Such stress around drinking also occurs because when someone who doesn't drink alcohol, someone who does drink alcohol doesn't understand someone who does drink alcohol, they can interpret that person's choice not to drink alcohol as a rejection, not simply of alcoholism, but of their connection in a relationship. Drinking alcohol with others is a connecting experience for many people. So someone who doesn't drink alcohol's refusal to drink alcohol, for example, drinks that they once enjoyed and shared with their family, can be seen as rejecting the family connection. And if we can see that, if we can understand that, then we can really throw away our ego and our need to defend and to change our tact and to come at this in a lot more wholesome and serving way, and not just thinking about ourselves, right? So I think that we really, really need to have an empathy here and to understand why becoming somebody who doesn't drink alcohol is going to have a massive ripple effect around people, and learn how to interact with people. Like, the Truth About Alcohol Intensive is 3 modules. Truth, learn the truth about alcohol. Number 2, raise awareness of that truth about alcohol neurologically, and think it and feel it, okay? And then number 3, freedom. Learn the freedom. Learn how to reassert yourself back in society, a society that is full of people who drink alcohol. That is super important. And this book, Beyond Beliefs, is an essential tenet of that final module, freedom, because we need to learn this stuff, right? One final thing that I want to talk about here that is super important is content versus process, okay? Content versus process. I wrote a blog post about it, and it's also in the intensive, but I'll share it here. Melanie says, when it comes to eating, all people, vegans and non-vegans alike, tend to focus on the content rather than the process. The content is what is being eaten, while the process is how people are relating to the whole experience of eating. Most of the content of our eating isn't even what we have chosen. It's simply what we inherited from our family and culture, and we keep eating the same foods in the same ways because that's what we're used to. Now, let me change the wording around that and inject alcohol, okay? When it comes to drinking, all people, drinkers and non-drinkers alike, tend to focus on the content rather than the process. The content is what is being drunk, while the process is how people are relating to the whole experience of drinking. Most of the content of our drinking isn't even what we've chosen. It's simply what we've inherited from our family and culture, and we keep eating the same foods in the same ways because that's what we've always done. A classic way of employing content versus process is when people worry that the relationships will falter because they can no longer find a commonality when it comes to socializing. All right. So people will say, my relationship is going to end because I will not be able to go out with my wife on a Saturday night anymore. Like, I cannot enjoy myself with alcohol anymore. Okay. This is confusing content with process. So to give you an example, it would be, let's say you are going to go out on a Saturday night with your wife and another group of couples, and you don't believe you can do that without drinking alcohol. And so you keep drinking alcohol, and that's your stumbling block. All right. That's because you're focusing on the content of drinking alcohol. But imagine if we concentrated on the process instead, the process of that evening. So let's just cut alcohol out of it a minute. You know that you're going out for the night. So one of the first things you're likely to do is find some clothes that you haven't worn for a long time, or you wear for special occasions, or you might even go out and buy some new clothes. So the process of dressing yourself up and making yourself look sexy. And in addition to that, you might wear makeup, you might be putting perfume on or aftershave, you might be doing your hair and you never normally do it, whatever. You might be trimming your moustache and your beard. Whatever it is, that process that you're going through is an enjoyable experience. It might be a little bit stressful because you want to look great when you go out. But when we finish and we look ourselves in the mirror, we're generally quite happy about what we see. And even if we're not happy about what we see, we will invariably throughout the night get some really good comments on how we look, which will fuel our self-esteem, right? Then there's always a ritual between going out. So I don't know about you, but my ritual is always music. So the music would be blasting in the background. Now, yes, there would be drinks as well. However, right now we're not concentrating on the content, right? We're concentrating on the process. So you're getting ready to go out. You're having a bit of banter with the people, because normally what happens is you get together to get ready as well. The music's blasting. You jump in a cab. You're laughing and joking. You get to the pub. Then you meet the other people, right? And you start talking to other people. They might compliment on how you look. You might look at them and think that they look good. And believe me, when you look at someone and they look good, whether they're male or female, same sex or not, it feels good. You're like, oh, wow, that person looks good. It feels good, right? It feels good to see that people look good. It feels good to feel that people are telling you look good. Then you start engaging in discussion and banter, and you start talking about the old days. You start talking about stuff that's going on in the world. You might talk about the elections in America, Donald Trump. You might talk about Brexit. You might talk about Sam Harris's new Waking Up app. You might talk about the football. You might talk about yoga, or whatever it is. You're having a conversation and you're connecting on a deep level. That is part of the process. You might get up and dance. That is part of the process. Whenever we dance, we will have a neurochemical signature that will send us feel good chemicals, right? So we'll start feeling good. If you're single, part of the process might be eyeing up somebody else, flirting, chatting up, kissing, fondling, later on having sex, right? Whatever it is, this is still part of the process. You might actually be going out to watch the football, part of the process. You might be playing poker, part of the process. Playing pool, playing darts, part of the process, right? Whatever it is, we're still in process mode, and alcohol has not been a part of that. It's not the content, okay? Now, if you can focus on the process and understand how the process is actually fulfilling your life. Now, let's take this back, and you're not going out. Let's say it's Christmas dinner. So it's Christmas dinner now, and you're used to Christmas dinner. Everybody's drinking. Drinking content, but now you're just focusing on the process. Then everybody's opening their presents, everybody's pulling crackers, everybody's doing party poppers, everybody's singing, everybody's playing games, everybody's getting their kids' Lego together and all that kind of stuff, hugging each other, loving each other. That is the process. That is a wonderful time. That shouldn't have to change just because we're not drinking alcohol. But what we do is we focus on the content. We focus on alcohol and the lack of alcohol. Why do we do that? We do that because we're addicted to drinking alcohol. And by pure definition of an addiction, when we don't drink it, when we don't consume it, it develops this kind of gaping missing piece of us, and our body will be sending us chemicals saying, you really need to drink alcohol, you're missing alcohol. And the simple fact that you are addicted to alcohol in that situation and you can't stop thinking about alcohol means you will not be able to enjoy the process. So then you drink alcohol for a little minute, you get a little bit of a hit, you start to feel a little bit better, but then that feeling, those stimulants, they wear off very quickly. William Porter, Alcohol Explained, read it and you'll find out why. Listen to our recent podcast. That disappears and now it's replaced by anxiety again. And how do you cure that anxiety? Your brain has been programmed for you to believe that the way to avoid anxiety is to drink again. So you're now wholly focused on content all the time, not process. So this part of the book I think is super, super important, because you can, if you focus on process instead of content, you can have a really fulfilling, connected experience with your partner. Okay. Now, at some point, if your partner drinks alcohol, that process is going to deteriorate, because as they drink more alcohol, they are going to become more disconnected to you. Okay. They're going to become more disconnected to you. But you can, if you're working on being allies, you can have a good conversation sober outside of that environment where you can come to some agreement. So I used to go out with my ex-wife when she was drinking, I wasn't, up until a certain point at night. Or I would just say, like, I don't really enjoy these nights out, so I'm not going to go out. But we can do other things together that don't revolve around alcohol, you know. But you need to have those discussions, but you can only have those discussions when you're coming from a place of respect, right? So those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about today out of Melanie's book. Becoming allies, super, super important. The different myths around difference, similarities, and the importance of compatibility, and, you know, understanding that it's super, super important that we embrace our differences and understand that differences are really important for a relationship, and don't see them as being roadblocks. And if we work together as an ally and we develop our communicative skills and we learn to listen and have empathy and support for our partners, then we can get this common ground and we can work towards being allies instead of being enemies, which just fires you like further apart. And to focus on content versus process. When it comes to you believing that you're not going to be able to enjoy yourselves with your partner or your partner's friends or with your own friends because of the absence of alcohol. Like, people who drink and people who do not drink, they don't have to be separate. We don't have to run away and form our own tribe. You should be able to coexist together. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that you should accept people who are really drinking too much alcohol into your life. Like, so I coexist in a friendship group with people who drink alcohol, but I can't remember the last time I saw one of my friends drunk, because the energy that I put out to the world, and the energy that I'm putting out to the world is I'm saying to the universe, the quantum field, whatever you want to call it, God, I'm saying, I don't want people in my life that drink alcohol, and I have a vision of what that looks like. And that looks like someone who slurs, talks too much, gets aggressive, has shallow level conversations, etc., etc. And then what the quantum field or the universe or God or whatever does is it presents those people to me. So I don't necessarily get people who abstain from alcohol, but I get people who drinking alcohol is a very, very minor part of their life. So when we're out, they might have a glass of wine or something. And when I see someone having a glass of wine with dinner, or 2 or 3, and that is it, I don't feel an urge to save their life. I don't feel an urge to tell them that alcoholism is an invisible, violent, dominant belief system, because I can see that drinking alcohol really isn't an important issue for them. They're part of alcoholism as an invisible, violent, dominant belief system, and they believe that alcohol has value, but I don't need to go there. But if I see one of my friends that's really, really hurting himself, that is more difficult for me, you know? So I try not to attract those people into my life. And the way that I do that is by reducing the amount of time that I spent with those type of people, and now I don't have any of them in my life anymore. Okay? So super important. I hope you enjoyed it. Please listen to the podcast that I did with Melanie Joy. I'll put a note in the show link. Put a link in the show notes here. If you're just listening to this in your car or whatever, then just Google it. Just Google Lee Davey Truth About Alcohol interview Melanie Joy, and you'll find it. And read her books. Her TED Talk is actually part of the Truth About Alcohol Intensive. So you can check that out if you want, but I'd prefer it if you checked it out when you join the intensive. And if you're listening to this, Melanie, thank you. I hope I've done your book justice. It's really difficult because there's so much wonderful stuff in there. And I just want to say that I love you, man. Like, you really are changing lives of so many people. If I reach my goal of creating a movement of 1 million people who don't drink alcohol, you're a real fundamental part of that. So I want to thank you for that. Okay. Take care, everybody. The Truth About Alcohol Taste Day is coming up in December. If you want to be a part of that, get to the truthaboutalcohol.co.uk and join up. If you want to join the intensive and learn more about Melanie's work, then do the same thing. If you just want to join Strive and start to build relationships on Strive that can help you with this type of stuff, same thing, www.thetruthaboutalcohol.co.uk. Thank you very much for listening.